Hi everyone, I'm Christy, Associate Editor here at Bookstr. Today we are incredibly lucky to have best-selling author Joe Hill, who is the author of some of the most unique supernatural horror out there today, Heart-Shaped Box, The Fireman, and Nosferatu, just to name a few. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, thanks for having me on. This is great.
So Joe is here to talk about the upcoming AMC adaptation of his book Nosferatu, which is, of course, NOS4A2, the vanity license plate of a very bad man with a very bad car who spirits children away to a very creepy psychological landscape.
Yeah, as the heavy in the book, the antagonist is a fella named Charlie Manx, who's over a century old. And he drives a Rolls-Royce Wraith, this car that runs on human souls instead of gasoline. And he's been, for over 100 years, he's been grabbing kids and taking them on this long drive. And over the course of the drive, he drains all their unhappiness out of them and all their regret and all their guilt and all their anxiety. And when he's done with them, there's nothing left except happiness and teeth. And he drops them off in this sort of fantastical otherworld called Christmas Land, where every day is Christmas and every day and unhappiness is against the law. Which actually sort of sounds kind of cool.
You would think. But
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing is when you think about, I think in America we have a tendency to sort of idealize childhood innocence.
Yeah.
And the thing is, innocence isn't all it's cracked up to be. A really innocent, child will rip the wings off a butterfly and laugh about it because they don't know any better. And our regret and our pain and our experience of sorrow actually makes us more human.
Yes.
Someone who's completely innocent isn't really a little angel, they're a little sociopath.
Of course.
Yeah.
No, Nosferatu is a very subversive novel. It subverts ideas of, I feel, happiness as well. Charlie Manx is a villain, but he's so joyous.
He is. He's having a lot of fun. He's had a lot of fun for a good century on America's back roads. It is. I think in right-wing media, there's been this kind of frothing about the war on Christmas for years, and my view is Nosferatu was my opportunity to open a brand new front in the war on Christmas.
Oh, you
because
do.
Christmas Land is a sort of terrible place. But I mean, so the thing about the way horror works, there's this Lon Chaney quote that I love. Lon Chaney said, "There's nothing funny about a clown at midnight." And so much of horror is about that. It's about taking something we love, something fun, something we trust, something we find reassuring, and then ripping the carpet out from under it. So like Christmas, we find Christmas reassuring and comforting. We find Christmas music, we hear it in November. It puts us right in the mood to give and have gifts and drink cocoa.
Not after reading this book.
Yeah. Well, so that's just it, right? So it's possible to kind of for horror, it's possible to find a way to subvert that and undermine it. So while Christmas music may be reassuring in the middle of the winter, if it's in the summer and you're on a walk through the woods and you're a little bit lost and you come across an old dilapidated shack with boards over the windows and you hear watery Christmas music coming from inside, you're going to whip around and head in the other direction as fast as possible because that's screwed up.
Of course.
Yeah.
So how do you balance that kind of supernatural horror with more of the very real, visceral horror of parenthood that's so prevalent throughout this novel? Or do you see the distinction?
Yeah, I mean, so the other side of, we've heard about Charlie, but the other side of Nosferatu, the heroine of Nosferatu, is a woman named Vic McQueen, and in the book we follow her through the course of her life. In the TV show, AMC's TV show, she's on the cusp of womanhood. She's 18, starting to make plans for her adult life. And Vic comes from a tough, working class neck of Massachusetts, and she has parents who she loves, but who are flawed and broken people.
Of course.
And her struggles as a young woman are, in their own way, kind of scary and sort of wrenching. Most of what I've written has been set in New England and has been set in that kind of milieu, and I do it because I feel like I know what the roads are like in New England. I know what jobs are like. I know the way people live their lives and the way they talk to each other and the way they raise children. And I feel like if I can convince you that my people are real and the place is real, then when I introduce a ghost or a vampire, you'll go along for the ride.
Absolutely.
So it's all about convincing the reader with fine granular details that what they're reading could be true.
Yes.
So
going along for the ride, quite literally in this case.
Yeah. So Vic has a supernatural power of her own. She has this motorcycle, this dirt bike, and when she goes out in the woods, she can find her way to a bridge that doesn't really exist in the real world. It's a kind of imaginary bridge, but it's physically real for her. And instead of crossing a river, her bridge spans the distance between lost and found. So when she's looking for something, a lost bracelet, someone who can help her with answers, a missing child, that thing she's looking for is always on the other side of the bridge. But crossing the bridge costs her something physically and psychically. And her and Charlie find themselves on a collision course with each other and wind up in doing supernatural combat over a series of increasingly fraught encounters.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, one of the most incredible things about the book, and there are many, is the nuance of the characters, right? So you did discuss how Vic McQueen, we see her over the course of her entire life, but a lot of these characters have very complicated redemption arcs. How did you feel when you were kind of looking at the whole scope of a character's moral actions?
So the TV show is the lead writer on that. The showrunner is a woman named Jamie O'Brien, who's from Massachusetts originally, and really grew up with a childhood very similar to Vic's childhood, or I don't know. I want to say very similar, but she certainly was in that milieu.
She probably didn't go across an imaginary bridge.
Right.
Saying.
She never had to fight for her life against a psychic vampire.
We hope.
Yeah, but she certainly knows that world, and I was really pleased with how much of that she got into the story, and she was able to explore some stuff like, you get to a certain age and you can look at your parents and you can see they didn't always get it right. You can see them as flawed people who have made sometimes quite terrible mistakes. And you can still love them. You can still care about them. And Vic trying to figure out how to do that, how to, balance what she feels for her parents with the desire for them to be accountable for their mistakes, is one of the emotional threads that runs through both the book and the TV show that I thought was pretty powerful. Jamie did a really wonderful job exploring that stuff. The other thing that the show explores, which feels kind of relevant, so we've got this guy Charlie. He's from the 19th century.
Yes.
Charlie has very old-fashioned ideas about how children should be and how women should be. And when he looks at Vic, he's kind of nettled by her, but also sort of drawn to her a little bit. And Vic has a friend, Maggie Lay, who also has supernatural powers. Vic and Maggie just can't seem to be the kind of women that Charlie Manx would approve of.
One without tattoos, for sure.
Right, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And the show really gets into this sort of these two big brave female leads battling with a patriarchy that in one sense is sort of patriarchal force, that in one sense seems like it's ancient, and in another sense is as recent as this morning's headlines.
Of course.
So,
tell us a bit more about the development of Charlie Manx, because I know his voice is so distinctive, so old-fashioned, where it's like, my joy.
Yeah. So this is one of the things I talked about with Jamie a lot when she was working on the TV show. When I write a story, the biggest challenge is getting the right sound of each character's voice. I feel like if I can capture the character's unique, distinctive voice, I know everything I need to know about them. And it was hard for Charlie. I mean, it took me about a year and a half to get Charlie's voice right, and it was like a year and a half of wheel spinning. But eventually, I kind of figured out, so there's a moment in the TV show that's also in the book. Charlie has a kind of Renfield figure named Bing Partridge, the gas mask man, who is scary in his own right. At one point, Bing grabs a child very roughly, and Charlie sort of shoves his hand away and says, "We never hurt the children. Hell is not too hot for such men." And there's something about that phrasing, that almost antique
Very
phrasing.
intense.
Yeah, it's very intense, but it also feels like this is his way of sort of interpreting the world. This is still how he talks. He still kind of talks like a man who has, moral ideas that developed in about 1905.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so we are going to switch over to some audience questions. So if you have any out there, please leave a comment. We're going to start off with a question.
We want to hear from you.
Yes, from Richard. So everyone is wondering this. How involved were you in the process of Nosferatu?
So I was an executive producer on the show, and I'm also, there's a TV show developing at Netflix based on my comic, Lock and Key. I admired the earrings, the Lock and Key earrings.
Of course.
Very cool. So I've had some time to find out what being an executive producer is all about. I've had about 18 months of sort of a learning curve on the job. Mostly it seems to me that the primary role of the executive producer is to eat craft service and to get underfoot while people are trying to make a TV show. Bonus points if you can wander through the shot.
So how many bonus points did you get?
Yep, high score for sure.
Congratulations.
No, I mean, I talked a lot with Jamie about voice, about how the characters should talk to each other, because I think that getting the voice right reveals so much about their inner lives and how they respond to the world. I talked about, almost as a viewer, when I would watch rough cuts, I would say, I loved this. This part scared me, and I didn't get that bit. And they'd say, "Oh, okay, we'll have to record a new line of dialogue and get that." So, but the main thing is, I wrote the book. I spent about 3 years writing the novel, and that's my version of the story.
Yes.
And I think the most positive thing I can do for the show is support Jamie O'Brien's unique vision. This is her version of the story, her chance to, and it's also Ashley and Jakara's version of the story. Ashley playing Vic McQueen, Jakara playing Maggie Lee. It's they get to tell their own version of the story, and that's kind of exciting. Anyone who wants my particular take on these characters, and that has the novel, and the novel won't change no matter what happens with the show.
Of course. So Sean wants to know, you put a lot of thought into this book. Did you come up with an outline for this novel beforehand? Which probably would have been a pretty long outline too.
Yeah, I was raised to believe that outlines are the tools of the devil. And to
Back to the devil.
to forswear them entirely. I think for me, I'm always trying to come up with an interesting, exciting, and suspenseful situation. A big fat sort of high concept hook that people can, get excited for. And then I try to find some characters that we can fall in love with, even if they're evil. Some characters we want to spend time with. And then I just kind of throw them in the mixing blender and see what happens. And I feel like, for me, outlines ruin the fun and also create a kind of schematic feel to the story that doesn't feel very organic or true to me. You put the characters in a situation, then you let them fight their own way out and see what happens.
And they certainly do fight their own way out.
Yeah,
Emphasis on fighting.
The other thing I would just say about not working with an outline is it is possible that working with an outline is a very streamlined, efficient way of doing. And I have to say, I am not a very efficient writer. Nosferatu was 700 pages when it was published, but it was probably 1,200 pages in first draft.
Of course.
And I wrote tons of material and had tons of detours that never went anywhere, that weren't particularly useful for the book. So, I have my method, but there's no one right way to write a book.
A very important question for fans of the book and future fans of the show. Does the series involve elements of the comic Wraith, which have direct ties with Nosferatu?
Right, so Nosferatu was published in 2013, and a year afterwards it was followed with a graphic novel called Wraith, which features some of the same characters from the book. It's a return to Christmasland, so we spend time in Christmasland. I always thought, so Christmasland is this kind of, it's always night there. It's always Christmas Eve or Christmas morning. And it's full of rides and games and these monstrous children who love a ride on the roller coaster and also love to play Scissors for the Drifter.
Of course.
Which is,
don't all children love to play that?
Right. It's kind of the world's worst version of tag. the comic Wraith is kind of like Con Air in Christmas Land. You know, you get these convicts who wind up there, you know, trying to fight their way out. All that material is available for the TV show. Some of it appears in season 1. If we're lucky enough to get a season 2, if people tune in, I'm sure we'll see more of it.
I'm sure you'll get a season 2.
Well, I hope so. Your lips to God's ears.
So another audience question like the one before. This one is from Nicholas. Will there be...
Hi, Nick.
Hi, Nick. Will there be Easter eggs in the show like there were in the book?
Yes. And then no further comment.
No further comment.
Yes, there are for sure some interesting little...
All right. Spoilers, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so then a question from Brandon. When someone comes to you
Hi,
to
Brandon.
do an adaptation of one of your books, are you all for it or more proceed with caution?
I generally, you know, I think one of the great things about this particular moment in time is when you write a short story or a novel or a comic and then someone comes along and says, I love this story, I want to do something exciting with it in a different medium, you know, on stage or as a TV show, or I want to take your book and make a comic out of it, or I want to take your comic and make a film out of it. And it's always interesting to see, you know, what is it in the story that another artist, that turns on another artist, that gets them excited, where they're like, you know, I wanted to check out this, I wanted to do more with this. And, you know, and I always root for them to succeed, too.
We all root for them to succeed.
Yeah.
So here's a great question from Jagdeep. How do you select the names for the characters inside your books? Great question. Do you put random names in a hat and blindly pick one?
No. How do I pick the names? Boy, I don't know. It always reminds me of this this Ray Bradbury talking about this one character he had in one story named Underwood, and he realized after he'd written about half the story that he was writing on an Underwood typewriter and didn't realize it, you know. But your subconscious just kind of flails around and comes up with whatever it comes up with. In the case of Charlie Manx, a Manx is a kind of engine. And in some ways, Charlie's true heart is not in his chest, but under the hood of his 1938 Rolls-Royce Wraith. So that felt like the right name for him. I was listening, when I worked on the book, I was listening to a Sheryl Crow song about Steve McQueen a lot, and so it's no surprise that Vic became Vic McQueen.
Right, of course, on the Triumph.
Right, yeah.
Absolutely.
Which Steve McQueen actually, so in the book, Vic finds a way to a 1968 Triumph Bonneville, which she can use to sort of activate her supernatural bridge. That is exactly the same bike that Steve McQueen used to race in off-road races, so very cool motorcycle.
And a very cool question from Patrick. I am teaching Dracula in one of my English classes. How well would this novel pair with that one for a comparative study? Interesting question because of the unusual take on vampires.
Right. I mean, and in some ways, Nosferatu is a retelling of Dracula. It has many commonalities. Bing Partridge, in a lot of ways, is Charlie's Renfield. Vic gathers a group of people, fellow heroes, to fight back against the encroaching darkness in the same way Harker and Van Helsing and some others bind together to fight Dracula. Charlie has a whole army of his sort of young, which is very like Dracula's icy brides. At the same time, I think the conventional vampire story with fangs and garlic is pretty played out. You know, a lot of those tropes feel overly familiar to me. And so I think one of the goals with Nosferatu was, how to reinvent the vampire story. What can we do to make all this stuff feel fresh again?
Without sparkles.
Right, no sparkles, right? That's rubbed my fur the wrong way, not my kind. That's not my vampires.
No, not this one for sure.
Yeah, definitely not.
So another audience question from Jessica. Where do you find ideas for characters and plots? Do you ever find inspiration in real-life situations? Hopefully not too many real-life situations.
You know, I don't really know. I mean, when I got to this building that we're doing this interview in, there was a bank of elevators, and it's sort of an Art Deco type elevators, and I got into one with bright red walls, and I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if a guy worked in an old New York City building, an Art Deco building, and it has 4 elevators in it. But sometimes when you're in a hurry, you accidentally get into the red elevator.
Oh.
So there's one elevator that has, and it's not always there. It's 364 days out of the year, it's not there. But every once in a while, instead of getting into an elevator with black walls, you get into an elevator with red walls. And where does it take you? You know, what is that the one? Is you know how a lot of buildings have the 12th floor and then the 14th floor?
Oh, right.
Maybe
Skipping
the
over
red
the
elevator.
creepy floor.
Maybe the red elevator can get you to the 13th floor. And what is
man.
on that floor? You know, and so it's really just kind of, you know, the whole idea of, you know, concept development is just. John Cleese said a thing where he said creativity isn't like a talent. It's like a lifestyle.
Okay.
You know, and that's kind of, you're just always sort of like, how can I take this and reinvent it in some interesting way? What's the playful thing I can do with this elevator, you know, with this bookstore, with this person, with this car, you know? And I actually think ideas are the easy part. You know, I can come up with 3 or 4, I think, big fat hooks a month. Unfortunately, execution is hard. You know, it takes me 3 years to write a book. It takes me, you know, anywhere from a month to 3 months to write a good short story.
Well, they're so immersive. That makes sense.
Well, you want to. It's so much of it is about fighting for the reader's attention. You know, we just live in an era of distraction. You can't leave anything to chance. You know, it's not enough to have every scene be good. Every paragraph has to have something kind of fun in it, or there's the risk that the reader will drift away and go back to Twitter or YouTube or.
Of course.
You know, yeah.
Well, for what it's worth, I'd love to read the novel about the elevators. But another audience question from Simona. If you would describe the series and book in 3 words, as opposed to hundreds of thousands of words, what would those words be?
Nosferatu.
Is that one of the words?
No. How would I describe it in 3 words? I would say suspenseful, heartfelt, feminist.
Yeah, I agree with those 3 words. I think anyone would.
I mean, I don't know that I don't know that I'm any, what do I know about feminism? I'm a schmo, you know, but I definitely think that the show certainly is. You know, you have this great pair of actresses as the lead. You have a female lead writer and showrunner in Jamie O'Brien, who was very interested in sort of unearthing some of these themes about how to be a woman in the modern world and what to do in the face of, you know, a lot of forces saying, it's not okay for you to live your life that way.
Right.
You know, and she was really interested in that. We had some great female directors work on the show, so I think there is something there which is kind of interesting that she unearthed in the novel that's fun to explore on the TV show.
I agree. I think kind of is a bit of an understatement. But then we have a question from Matt, which is how close to your imagining has the casting worked out?
Pretty great. You know, I used to have this thing I said about Lock and Key, which is true. You know, Lock and Key was this comic I did with Gabriel Rodriguez for 7 years. I used to say I learned as much about the characters from the way Gabe drew them as he ever learned from me about the way I wrote them in the script. And I feel that way a little bit about the actors and actresses who tackled the characters in Nosferatu. I think, you know, Jakara Smith plays Maggie Leigh, the librarian, and in some ways her performance as that character has deeply expanded my sense of who that person was in a really satisfying, fun way. I feel like I've remade Maggie's acquaintanceship. And at the same time have found out a bunch of stuff about her I never knew.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, that's great.
All right. Well, thank you so much for all of your questions.
Thanks,
and thank
guys.
you so much for all of your answers.
Thanks for talking to me.
Before we go, let us know where we can find the show.
So you'll be able to check out Nosferatu on AMC. It drops on June 2nd. There'll be 1 episode a week for 10 weeks. But if you can't wait, if you know you've got to binge it right away, you can also get it on AMC Premiere, where the night it's released, the whole series will be available to stream.
All right. Thank you so much for watching.
Thanks,
and thank
guys.
you so much for coming. Tune in, everybody.